Hi, I'm Pete Gerlach. I'm the author of the Break the Cycle nonprofit website that you may be looking at, or I hope you do. I want to present an idea to you today that may be new to you, and it's important for you and your marriage and your family if you're married. The subject is blocked or incomplete grief. You ever attended a lecture on that? Ever read a book about that? I've been a professional therapist for over 31 years, and what I've come to observe in many troubled individuals, couples, families, is that one of the stresses that they experience, and they're for the most part unaware of, is grief that has not been completed. The Break the Cycle website is composed of 8 self-study lessons. They're sequential. The third lesson has to do with raising your awareness on what is good grief. What is healthy grief, and how does it get blocked? And if you are suffering incomplete grief, what can you do to free it up? Grieving is nature's way of helping us adapt to inevitable broken bonds. A bond is created when we form a special emotional, psychological, mental attachment to something or someone. It can be physical, like a person, like a house, like a favorite location, like an object, a memento. It can be invisible. We can form bonds to our health, to our youth, to our freedom, to our integrity, to our looks. We form attachments or strong preferences to things throughout our lives for reasons that are within our control or outside our control. Our bonds break. Death is the most common, well-known kind of broken bond. When you lose a loved one, a child, a mate, a parent, a sibling, a mentor, there are many other equally powerful losses that we all experience throughout our lives, and very few people pay any attention to them. Our culture tends to demean and minimize losing and healthy grief. How can you tell if you have incomplete grief? The symptoms are similar to depression. One major symptom is chronic sadness. Another major symptom is chronic anger. Rageaholics often are suffering from incomplete or stuck grief. Another physical symptom that's pronounced in the American culture, perhaps elsewhere, is obesity. Many people feel, human service professionals feel, that people who are suffering grief and who lack permission to grieve in a healthy way comfort themselves by eating certain foods high in fat, carbohydrates, comfort foods. Obesity can be a sign, it's not proof, but it can be a sign that you may be suffering from incomplete grief of some major important loss earlier in your life. So depression, grief, chronic sadness, chronic anger, apathy, indifference, and not feeling interested in life, not knowing what you want to do, or not much caring about your life. Sometimes suicide is a symptom of unfinished grief and some other things. So there are signs all around us that people may be experiencing and burdened with incomplete grief. Lesson 3 gives you more detail on how to determine if perhaps you or someone you care about, including children, are blocked in grieving important losses. If you conclude that you are blocked or someone you care about, what can be done? The good news is you can free up and complete healthy 3-level grieving. By 3-level, I mean mental, psychological, and for some people, spiritual. Grieving has 3 levels. Each level has several different phases. If you have blocked grief or incomplete grief, the very first step to take is study lesson 1 in this website, which costs nothing. It's free education based on 31 years of research and clinical experience. Free your true self to guide you. If a false self guides you, it's much more likely that you will have trouble completing healthy grief and moving on with your life. So, study lesson 1, learn to free your true self. The second thing you need to free up stuck grief is to learn about grieving. Our society doesn't teach us much about this, neither do our ancestors. Lesson 3 provides some fundamental information about bonding, losses, and grieving, the 3 levels and the phases of normal grief. So learn about healthy grief. One of the things you'll learn in this lesson is that a requisite for healthy grief can be called permissions. There are 2 kinds of permissions we all need in order to grieve well. The first starts within our skin. We need to have permission to go through the 3 levels of grief and reach the stage at the end of each level, which is called acceptance. If we are raised in a family, a low nurturance family, where the people that raise us are uncomfortable with strong emotions or with grief, they themselves don't know how to grieve, they don't tolerate kids who need to grieve, they don't guide kids and support kids who need to grieve, you may inherit an anti-grieving policy, so to speak. That means you grow up with some values that say, I must keep a happy face, even if I'm dying inside. Baloney. That's unhealthy. I can't burden other people with my pain. Baloney. Not true. Other people can take care of themselves as to how much pain they're willing to share with you. I can't talk about my unhappiness. Baloney. You have to talk about your pain and your losses over and over again until your story is told. So, you may have inherited an anti-grief policy from your childhood. If so, the thing to do is to find out, what is your policy about grieving? Lesson 3 shows you how to do that. If you have an anti-grief policy, you can intentionally change it. You can adopt some new, healthier values about grieving. It's okay to cry. It's okay to get angry and feel outrage, even at God, if you sustain a major loss that doesn't make sense at first. It's okay and healthy to grieve. It's okay to be around people who permit you to and encourage you to grieve. That's the second type of permission that we all need. We need to be among healthy people who accept that grieving is a normal part of healthy life and who encourage us and patiently support us as we grieve. If you're in a family, it's useful to check out, what is your family's grief permission, your grief policy? Every family has a policy about grieving. Usually it's unspoken. It has to do with, is grieving healthy? Do we support people who grieve? How do we support them? When do we support them? How do we know when people need support? So check out your family's grieving policy, especially if you are a parent, or you may be. What are you teaching your children? about healthy grieving? Are you giving them a pro-grief, a supportive grief environment? They're depending on you to do that. If you don't, they are apt to, at some point in their lives, be stuck in grieving and have these psychological and perhaps physical symptoms that are toxic. So, improve your inner grieving policy. Seek a supportive outer grieving policy. Another thing you can do to support yourself is go back over your life once you understand the concept of losses and broken bonds. Take an inventory of the major losses that you have sustained in your life. A universal example is loss of childhood innocence, loss of childhood freedom. We as young and mature adults have responsibilities that we never had as kids. That's a kind of loss. Loss of health, loss of vision, loss of the use of a limb, loss of jobs, loss of hope, loss of integrity, loss of a marriage, loss of a child. When your child leaves home, even under the best of circumstances, that causes some major losses. So go back across your life when you're not distracted, perhaps with people who know you and support you. Make a list of the major losses that you have encountered. Then examine each loss and see if you have grieved it well. Signs of not grieving well include anniversary depression. Every August 4th, which is when my son died, I get real depressed. No, that is probably blocked grief. Being unwilling to talk about a loss can be a symptom. Being depressed at reminders of major losses, music, people, names, favorite mementos, holidays. There are many things that trigger sad feelings that can be, not always, but may be signs of unfinished grief. So go back, list your losses, and look compassionately at each one. Can I talk openly about this loss? Do I know what this loss meant to me? Often people don't stop to appreciate. This is what the loss of my longtime friend has meant to me. Take an inventory, check out whether you feel you've grieved each major loss in your life after you've decided what's your policy about grieving. If you have not grieved a particular loss, permit yourself, encourage yourself to go through the questions in the mental phase of grieving. Lesson 3 shows you what they are. And speak often to other compassionate people about your loss. Tell your story over and over again until you don't need to tell it anymore. The last thing that Lesson 3 urges you to do in order to help break the cycle of psychological wounds and unawareness, the last thing is, if you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, make it a point to teach the young people in your family about healthy grief and do everything you can to promote a pro-grief family. So, grieving can be blocked. When it is blocked, it can create major, serious psychological and physiological problems. Blocked grief can, once you're aware of it, be freed up and completed. Lesson 3 out of the 8 in this website shows you how. I hope you will study lesson 1 and 3. You need 1 to do 3. I hope you find it challenging, educational, useful. I hope it raises your awareness. I hope it helps you live a more productive, balanced, Hello, I'm Pete Gerlach. I'm the author of the nonprofit Break the Cycle website that you may be watching, looking at, or hope you do. In this brief video, I'd like to introduce you to the theme, the main topic of Lesson 3 out of 8 in this website. Lesson 3 has to do with good grief. It's a subject that many people are a little uncomfortable with. Our society does not do a good job, in my opinion, of helping people understand bonding, losses, and grieving, and the importance of grief. So I want to touch on those subjects right now. First, how would you describe bonding in the context of human beings and human behavior? Well, what does bonding mean to you? Have you bonded with certain things in your life? Many people think automatically of bonding with people. Yes, healthy people form attachments, emotional, sometimes spiritual attachments, to certain special people. We also form bonds throughout our lives to a number of invisible things that have nothing to do with people. For example, we become bonded to our independence unless we become disabled. We become bonded to our youth until we lose it to middle age and old age. We become bonded to places, special music, special foods, special rituals. Many things we develop a great fondness for. Can be said that we bond to those things. Do you have some favorite music that you prefer to listen to, for instance? We all bond throughout our lives unless we're emotionally damaged. What you also know is that because of choice or chance, we break selected bonds. For instance, we cannot control losing our bond to youth and innocence and lack of responsibility. As we age, society expects us to put those down, and we lose those prizes that we enjoyed for a number of years. So we have some choices we make, we have some losses that we make by choice, and some that we are forced to make by external circumstances. Losses cause disruption in our lives. Broken bonds cause us to lose our concentration, lose our serenity, lose our focus. Losses vary in impact from minor to major. The losses associated with the death of a beloved person are rated by some sociologists and psychologists as the most profound, most impactful losses that average healthy human beings can sustain. Many other losses still are significant. One of the most popular groups of losses, unfortunately, in the American society is a set of losses that comes from psychological or legal divorce. In case you have been divorced or you know someone well who has divorced, you will know that divorce causes people to lose security, to lose identity. I am no longer a married person. To lose some degree of hope for the future, to lose independence, to lose financial security, perhaps for some, to lose dreams. Divorce, which people usually don't want and don't choose unless they're forced to, causes a group of invisible losses. So losses can be concrete. I'm so sad my pet dog just got run over. My grandmother, who I love dearly, just died. Those are physical, tangible losses. There is a group of invisible losses, abstract losses that you can't take pictures of, but they still have a profound emotional effect on your life. Nature has provided us with a healing process, which, as you know, is called grieving or mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. They mean the same thing. It is a process whereby mentally, emotionally, and for some people spiritually, they can move through stages and gradually reach acceptance of that which they have lost. They can resume normal functioning in their lives and enjoying other aspects of their life. Mourning is a process that, if you're healthy and if you're in the right kind of environment, is automatic. However, for many reasons, for many people, mourning is blocked or hindered. In order to mourn in a good way, in a healthy way, you need at least 3 requisites. Can you name them? You know what they are? I bet your parents never taught you what they were. The first requisite for healthy, good grief is awareness. You have to be aware that you lost something of value. You also have to be aware of the impact the loss has on your life. Specifically, how is it affecting you? The opposite of awareness is denial or repression or minimizing or intellectualizing. All of those hinder full awareness of a broken bond and what the break means. So the first requisite for healthy grieving is awareness. In my experience for 31 years as a therapist, studying human nature, one thing that destroys or hinders awareness is being ruled by a, quote, false self. If you studied lesson 1 in this website, you'll know the difference between a false self and a true self. I won't reiterate the difference now, but I do encourage you, if you don't know about the difference, study lesson 1. It's highly relevant to your life, especially if you're a parent. So you need awareness. Usually that is a byproduct of having your true self direct your personality. The third thing you need for healthy grief is what I call a pro-grief, P-R-O, grief environment. You have to be among people who appreciate and respect the bonding, losing, and grieving processes, and who encourage and accept the signs of healthy grief. As you know, we grievers, we losers, because we're all losers in that sense, when we are grieving, we show a lot of emotion, principally shock, anger or rage, despair, numbness. We show emotional signs. We also have mental signs that we're grieving. We need to tell our story and be heard and understood empathically over and over again. I can't stand knowing that my grandmother is gone. She gave me so much, blah, blah, blah. Grievers need to tell their story. They need to speak out loud a series of important questions. Why did this happen? Why did this happen now? Why did this happen to me? What could I have done to block this loss? What does this loss mean to me? What does this loss mean to people who are important to me? What do other people do when they lose this thing? Typically, grievers have an array of unique questions that occur to them over time. The first phase of the mental level of grieving is mental confusion that morphs into disorganized questions that come up repetitively. That morphs into tentative answers to the questions. And finally, in the final acceptance phase of the mental level of grief, the questions begin to die away as the answers become credible, and we resume focusing on other parts of our lives mentally. The second level of healthy grief is the one that's most well known, thanks to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and that is the emotional or psychological level of grief. Most people have heard, indirectly or directly, When you have a loved one die, which is what she focused on, you go through several phases emotionally. Shock, disorientation, confusion, which is mental also. Then anger. Why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? It shouldn't have happened. The next phase of normal, healthy emotional grief is sadness. That in extreme form, that can be despair. You can bounce back and forth between these phases: confusion, anger or rage, sadness or despair, over time, if you're in the right environment and if you're emotionally healthy. These phases move you towards feeling accepting. You accept your loss and what it means, and you move on. You become less emotionally focused on the loss and its impact. The third of 3 levels in healthy grief, for some people, not everybody, is spiritual. People who are devout and believe in a higher power and a supreme being, a benign supreme being, can question their faith if they lose something extraordinarily precious to them. They can question their God and say, how could you let this happen? I don't understand. You're supposed to be a loving God. People can go through a confusion about their faith, a loss of their faith, and in many cases, later, as time goes on and healing occurs, they regain their faith, which may even be stronger. So, healthy grieving has 3 levels: mental, emotional, psychological, and for some, spiritual. To go through these 3 levels, you need to have your true self in charge. You need to be aware of your loss and its impact, and you need to be among people who promote and endorse healthy grieving. One of the things that can block healthy grief is what I call an anti-grief policy. We all have policies about losses and grieving. A policy is a set of values and beliefs. If you, as a young person, were taught you're supposed to be happy all the time, you shouldn't burden other people with your problems, don't cry in public, don't get angry in public, people who show anger are bad. If you were taught things like that, that will inhibit healthy grief. Unless you change those core beliefs as you grow into adulthood, you will become an adult with an anti-grief policy. You are apt to unconsciously repress the normal healing process of grieving. You need to re-examine your own personal policy about losses and grieving and how to express your grief and where and when and with whom, and establish a pro-grief policy. There's an article in Lesson 3 that explains much more about grief policies. The second kind of grief policy you need in order to do good grief is to be among people who themselves promote consistently healthy grief attitudes and values. You need to be around people who are comfortable if you need to express grieving emotions, meaning anger or sadness or despair and hopelessness. You need to be encouraged to tell your story over and over. You need to be encouraged to ask these questions that have no answers except your own. And you have to be among people who, in appropriate ways, can offer you sympathetic and empathic touching, which is very healing in many ways. You have to be around people who are comfortable if you need to cry. Say it's okay. You'll be okay. So you need to have a pro-grief policy inside your skin, and you need to be consistently among people who have a pro-grief policy outside of your skin. If you live in a dysfunctional family, the second one is much less likely. Hello, I'm Pete Gerlach. I'm the author of the nonprofit Break the Cycle website. That website presents 8 self-improvement lessons which come from my 31 years as a family therapist and 70 years of studying us human critters. The third of these 8 lessons focuses on good grief. All of us throughout our lives form attachments if we're mentally healthy, and eventually the bonds that we form with precious people, things, abstract things, break. Nature provides us with a way of adapting to these losses. It's called grief. Grieving often is a forgotten subject. Many people don't know much about it, and they don't want to know much about it. As a therapist, I've observed a high percentage of well over 1,000 clients and students, most of whom survived early childhood trauma. Many of my clients and students have described being, quote, depressed. I have begun to suspect and now believe much of what is called depression is really blocked grief. The importance of this is people who seek relief by medication cannot get relief if they need to grieve. In fact, medication blocks the healthy response of grief. The purpose of this video is to summarize the thoughts I've got for over 30-some years of pondering what's the difference between depression and grieving. How can you tell? The symptoms of grieving and depression overlap, or in many ways are similar. Stop to think. When someone says, how do you know if someone's depressed? Think of the symptoms that come to your mind. Often the answer says something like, well, prolonged sadness, deep sadness, despair, apathy, loss of interest in life, inability to enjoy the pleasures in life, sometimes difficulty sleeping, sometimes loss of appetite, sometimes bursts of anger or irritability, sometimes crying episodes or, quote, jags, unquote, with or without any supposed reason. In extreme cases, some people have suicidal thoughts. They want to end their life because they feel despairing, which means hopeless. The symptoms of grief, stages of grief, and of depression are very, very similar. My proposal here is that most average people, including human service professionals and other college-educated people, often don't know how to distinguish between depression and grief. My experience over and over and over with hundreds of clients is those of us who were traumatized when we were very young, which is high percentage of the population, were taught not to grieve well, not to grieve in public, to get over grief as fast as possible, which goes against nature. It's like to digest your food faster. Many such injured children come into adulthood, and when they experience a loss, and they experience the symptoms of grieving, instead of saying, oh, I'm healthy, I'm grieving, this is good, let me be patient as the process unfolds and completes. They say, oh, I'm depressed, or people around them say, well, you're really depressed, including doctors. Often, I think doctors overprescribe medication, underprescribe the holistic solution, saying, it might be good to review if you've lost something of importance in your life recently. Perhaps you're grieving and you don't need medication. So, I mean to offer you the question, the next time you feel unusually sad, either in scope or duration or intensity, instead of assuming that you are, quote, depressed, also include the possibility maybe you are undergoing the normal healing process of grief. One way you can help yourself and help the people you care about in making this distinction, study lesson 1 in my website. It's nonprofit, there are no ads, I'm not selling anything except awareness. Lesson 1 will alert you to whether your true self is running your life or whether you are controlled by a well-meaning, myopic, false self. False selves indicate childhood trauma. Frequently, they mean you're not going to be able to grieve very well. So study lesson 1 and find out who's really running your life. If it's a false self, dedicate yourself to freeing your true self. That will indirectly, among many other benefits, that will help you grieve. The second thing I urge you to do, invest time studying lesson 3 in the Break the Cycle website. Give yourself information that I suspect you were not given by your parents or your teachers. Give yourself basic information about the normal, healthy, 3-level process of grieving. Some of the other videos in this series will give you an intriguing quiz to see how much do you know about healthy grieving. You probably don't know what you don't know. Study the 3 levels of grieving and the phases that comprise the grief. Doing that will help you understand, am I grieving? If so, where am I in the process? Am I done or do I have more? Study lessons 1 and lessons 3. The next time you meet someone that says, oh, I'm depressed, consider alerting them to the possibility maybe you're not depressed, maybe you're grieving. That includes medical professionals and therapists of every type. So in my experience, many of us, I'm a therapist, I was never trained, ever, on depression, the roots of it, and how it, or grieving, and how those two compare and manifest, and how to differentiate them. So, I hope this will widen your awareness as you seek a serene and happy life, and you seek to provide that for the people in your family and your friendship circle. Be aware of the distinction between depression and normal, healthy grief. Thanks for watching.